welcome everybody. Appreciate your time this afternoon. Hot topic, moving from a reactive to a proactive supply chain, right? This is specific to our JD Edwards customer base. A lot of you out there we have worked with for many years. There's definitely some new companies listed, so welcome. We'll give you a quick overview as to who Trillium is, but I will say, you know, in the 22 years I've been here at Trillium and all the webinars we've done, this is the largest from an attendee perspective that we've ever had. So clearly, given the current environment, this is a hot topic, and I think everybody will be very interested and excited to see what you know, the cloud is offering from a supply chain perspective to complement your current JD Edwards environment. So first off, housekeeping. How to ask questions, as you'll see right in the attendee bar, the little question mark. Feel free to type in the question at that point, right? We should have 5 to 10 minutes or so towards the end of the presentation where we can go through those questions and make sure we get them addressed. If we run out of time, right, we'll circle back with you and get you what you're looking for. A quick intro, it was a very quick intro, as to who's going to be presenting today. Myself, Matt LeSueur, VP of Sales here at Trillium, have been at Trillium for 22 years. Also, I've got Brian Rose. Brian is our director of our digital transformation. And what that really means is, right, he's helping our customers help transition to some of the more modern SaaS-based solutions out there. Brian's been in the JD Edwards and supply chain space for over 10 years. And last but not least, David Moon. David has been in JD Edwards and supply chain for over 20 years. So he'll be going through the demonstration with us today. For those of you who don't know us, a quick overview of Trillium. We've been around for 28 years. We are privately held and based in Cincinnati, Ohio. But of course, we have resources across all of North America and deploy on a global basis. Size-wise, we're well over 200 employees now and continue to grow. And over that 28 years, we've implemented well over 700 ERP deployments. And that's really just within the Oracle family of products, because that's all we do is Oracle. We do operate on a W-2 model. So we're not going out bringing in a bunch of subcontractors. We rely on our own employees to ensure, you know, quality and deployment, and that we're all following the same methodology. We also deploy within a onshore model. If there's heavy development, we might move some of that offshore, but for majority of these projects, right, we like to use on-site, onshore resources. It just, again, goes back to the quality of the deliverable hitting the timelines. We also have a hire model that is typically, right, senior resources that we're deploying on projects. So, you know, like Brian has been here, you know, 10 years, David, right, 20 years in the industry. So we've got a team of people that have been out deploying Oracle solutions for a long time. We specialize in really in that manufacturing, distribution, and project space. And really, if you look across the footprint of the products we're deploying, JD Edwards, Supply Chain Cloud, Fusion Cloud, these are products that fit within those industries very well. We are certified across the stack, so we're certified, of course, across the JD Edwards stack, and we're certified across the Oracle's cloud stack as well. So financial, supply chain, procurement, order management, PLM, OTM, you name it, right? We're certified across those stacks, and we get to go through that process every year. Also today, you'll hear a little bit about the integration kit that we've built out for Supply Chain Cloud and JD Edwards. It's a starter kit, so we'll go through some of that with you. It's some of the IP we've developed to help deploy this on a consistent basis across the JD Edwards customer base. And then also for customers that are considering more of a transformational project, that are looking at maybe moving from JD Edwards to Oracle's Fusion Cloud or to the NetSuite solution, we have pre-built some data conversion tools to help transition customers' master data into the cloud. And it wouldn't be a presentation if we didn't have kind of the NASCAR slide. So we want to throw out a bunch of names you guys will recognize that are utilizing Oracle's cloud supply chain solution today.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So guys, I'll take it from here. So like Matt said, Brian Rose, I'm the Director of Digital Transformation here at Terillium. I've been involved in the supply chain industry for a long time, and my background is deep JDE. So it gives me a great understanding of how these different edge products can really fit some of the gaps that we see within the JDE space. From an agenda perspective today, we're going to be running through a couple of key topics. One, what are some of the key ways we can transform your supply chain into more proactive versus a reactive plan? Introduction into the SCM cloud. What are some of the benefits of it? How does it impact and benefit specifically JD Edwards organizations? We're going to do a high-level demo of supply and demand planning in the cloud. That's going to be about 20 to 25 minutes. So it'll give you a taste of how it works and kind of give you an understanding of how it can fit your specific needs. Talk about some of those integration kits like Matt brought up earlier, and then finally, Q&A at the end. So I bring up this representation because to me, it shows a very basic difference between a reactive supply chain and a proactive supply chain. So when we think of a reactive supply chain, and a lot of organizations run this way, you're really kind of flying by the seat of your pants each day. You're fighting fires as they arise with no real significant forward-thinking strategy. Whereas in more of a proactive supply chain, I'm leveraging key data points and systems to help me plan weeks, months in advance to validate the key needs and solve ultimately complex problems to keep myself and the process as efficient as possible. So when we think of different types of situations that are proactive versus reactive, here are really three real-life examples of how proactive versus reactive situations kind of impact your organization. So in any manufacturing facility, shop floor capacity is obviously key. If you overload your work centers, your machines, you're going to have throughput issues, and ultimately that'll lead to on-time delivery issues. In a reactive supply chain, organizations a lot of time will just send their orders to the floor and react once overloads occur. So when their bottleneck work centers have issues, a machine maybe goes down, you're in reaction mode. In more of a proactive environment, the planner's leveraging capacity planning tools that can level load and constrain their plans and looking out 2 to 4 weeks to make sure that if there are any issues, they're aware of them and they're able to shift a work order from one specific line to another, or possibly even outsource that to a vendor. And the next situation is around long lead time parts. I know this is something that has obviously been crucial with COVID and how lead times I know have doubled for a lot of organizations. But when you get into more of a reactive environment, you don't have that long-term inventory plan for those lead time parts where if you don't have one, you can't run your production line. And it leads you to be scrambling with order and expedites to ultimately satisfy that demand. In a proactive environment, we're utilizing inventory stocking policy for those key components and service levels, and driving those based on the demands and also your seasonality to make sure, one, you don't run out of product, but two, you're also not holding so much inventory where you don't have enough space possibly in the organizational structure. The final situation is around demands at risk, and I think this is one that's really, really important. So when we think of being reactive to demands at risk, many times JDE customers don't really know what demands that they have that are going to be at risk until it's too late. By the time you are in a situation where you're having to order an expedite, overnight ship, move orders around. But when you have a proactive environment where you're systematically really organizing those demands and looking at those risks weeks in advance, it allows you to really prioritize, one, your top customers first, and also making sure that you're hitting your dates. Now, this doesn't mean you're never going to have any reactive type of planning in the supply chain. I think COVID is the perfect example of how organizations have had to adapt and react. Hopefully nothing like this ever happens again, but by having tools that can help you in those situations, it makes those reactive type of components much easier, and it's really a monumental change. So how do we get there? What are the steps that we need to take to really drive in that direction? And it always, for me, kind of comes back to these three key areas. It's our people, our process, and our technology. So for today, we're mostly going to focus on the two parts of the equation, which are process and technology. Because at the end of the day, a lot of times your technology and tools leveraging those tools are often what drive the most efficient process to accomplish a task. So for many people on this call today, your processes and your technology is JD Edwards, right? And as you know, JDE it's a very complete ERP system. It's got deep functional functionality in finance, distribution, manufacturing, and all different types of areas. Unfortunately, one of the key areas that it's always been a pain point in JDE is really that supply chain management piece of the software. You have the necessities, right? You can run a supply plan, you can run a demand plan, but many times it's lacking the features that organizations need to really answer questions that are important to them from a supply chain perspective. And as much as, like I said, I'm a JDE guy at heart, and as much as I love JDE, it's at times not the best tool for organizations to reach their supply chain goals. And it kind of relates to this picture for me. So we're talking about using the right tools for the job will do more for your productivity than hacking tools to do jobs they weren't designed to do. Me as a woodworker, I love this picture just because you're hammering in a bolt here versus using a wrench, right? So this is a great example of that. Becomes, let's think of JDE MRP, right? The output, it's not designed to create a constrained plan, right? It's not taking into consideration your materials, your capacities, your supplier capacities. So instead of you trying to hack JDE by constraining it via customizations or utilizing tools like Excel reports that are outside the system, really the most efficient way to tackle this need is to use a tool that's built for this specific purpose. Now, within all of the implementations that I've done, a lot of times the questions that buyers and planners have are fairly similar, right? So example, John, the buyer, wants to know, am I missing any material to start a job? Am I going to be able to meet the demand on the sales order coming in for the week? Do I have capacity right now for my work centers? For Christy, the buyer, she's more worried about questions such as, am I holding too much or too little inventory to satisfy all the demands that I have? Or are all my long lead time parts covered? In JDE, not all of these questions are impossible to answer. There's certainly ways that you can do it, but many times the process to get that answer takes significantly longer than it really should. So due to that, we here at Terillian, we're seeing more and more organizations seeking the right tool for the job, where they don't have to rip and replace their ERP, but they can utilize its built-in strengths and combine those with a best-in-breed type of supply chain planning solution. And you can see in here the one that we utilize is the Oracle Cloud solution. So just kind of diving into what JDE is out of the box. So like I said earlier, it does have built-in demand and supply planning. You can run an MRP plan, you can create a forecast, but what you're going to notice is if I were to show what the holistic approach of what a supply planning tool is, this is going to be more of a complete fit for an organization. So this visualization here shows all of the key features that are built into the Oracle supply chain planning tool, from demand management through sales and operations planning, supply chain collaboration, which is me communicating with vendors, contract manufacturers, and also supply planning. Built-in social features around messaging, analytics is something that Dave, I know, is going to show in a little bit, which is an incredible tool to really get your KPIs and information that you want to see. But this is a way where I can really round out my supply chain by, like I said, leveraging the functionality JDE has out of the box from a financials and procurement perspective, but having a best-in-breed supply planning tool give me some recommendations of how I accomplish my tasks. So what we're going to be doing quickly is jumping through each of these different buckets. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them because I want Dave to be able to show these more from a demonstration perspective. But the Oracle Cloud Demand Management module, it combines proven forecast algorithms with really flexible analytics to, at the end of the day, anticipate customer demands. It's giving you immediate feedback on things like new products, business segments, customer behaviors, along with giving you, time phase replenishment requirements. So a very, very powerful tool. Now, within each of these different modules, the best way for me to kind of think about this from a comparison perspective is doing a little bit of a fit gap of some of the things that I see a lot of times in organizations that run JDE, types of requirements that they have, and then determining, can this be satisfied in JDE, or is this a feature that would just live inside of the cloud planning tool? So I'm not going to go through each of these individually, and also we'll be sending this deck out so you'll have this from a collateral perspective, but there are a couple that I do want to cover. Okay, so many organizations want to know and simulate what if situations. So, example, what happens if a large order drops in? What if my largest supplier can't satisfy my demands anymore? What if a machine goes down? What if I add a shift or a weekend crew? What does that do to my supply chain? Understanding those what if situations and getting a real-time view of how that can impact all of your orders and your planning is a game changer. And it's something that tons and tons of organizations do at this point, either offline or through manual manipulations. Inside of the demand planning tool, you can do all of those types of simulations. And it's not just across the demand plan, but in SNLP, in supply planning, all of those have what if simulations. The other thing I wanted to highlight is the ability to generate multiple plans. So as you guys know, inside of JDE, it's really a single MRP output, right? You get a single plan, and if you want to make changes to it or run simulations, you can't do it. You just kind of rerun your plan. Inside of Cloud, you can have multiple plans, and you can compare those plans to one another. I can say, if I run this plan and maybe I outsource an item versus I run this plan and I shift it from this facility to a different facility, which one gives me the best output? You can do those types of simulations inside of this tool. So very, very powerful in that way. The next thing is around SNLP. So sales and operations planning at the end of the day, it's an integrated planning process that aligns demand, supplies, financial planning, and it's managed as part of the company's master planning. It's designed to really execute and support executive decision making. Do I need to buy more machines? Do I have to bring in resources? What does my forward thinking future look like from a organization perspective? Do I need to buy another building? All of those types of decisions can be identified and run through simulations inside of this SNLP planning tool. Now, JDE doesn't have any SNLP out of the box, so it's obviously a whole different ballgame when we get into this planning tool. But really the two features I'd like to jump into here is one, that ability to execute a forward-looking SNLP process, which is connected to the organization's strategy and operations, which allows the organization to plan for the future. Same type of thing we talked about on the demand planning side. Running simulations is such a valuable tool to where I can say, like I said, if I were to buy a building, what does that do to my output? If I were to bring in a couple more machines, what does that do to my output? Will that reduce the cost? Whatever it might be. All those simulations can be run inside of the planning tool in SNLP. So just like demand planning, JDE does out of the box have a supply planning tool, mrpMPS for those of you guys know that, but it comes with its limitations. The Oracle planning tool really gives you a simpler, faster, better way to plan and execute your operations strategy. It detects material issues, capacity constraints, prioritize competing demands, and at the end of the day, also reroutes global supply to minimize your disruptions. Constraint-based planning is probably the #1 biggest differentiator that I see from a JDE to a supply planning tool. So I can obviously run an unconstrained plan inside of JDE Edwards. The problem we run into there is when we are assuming infinite capacity. Everyone knows no organization in the world has infinite capacity. So with us having the ability to constrain our plan, what that allows us to do is understand all of our bottlenecks, give us a actual valid date where we can build a product, and it'll take different options into play. Like I said, if I can move a order from one line to another, if I can outsource a product from one supplier versus the other. So all of those can be built in. And the other one from a value perspective is identifying those demands at risk. This, once again, is something we talked about earlier, but I think it is so crucial to the supply plan. What it allows you to do is quickly and easily identify all demands that are directly at risk and recommend different solutions to mitigate that risk from an operations perspective. The last one is supply chain collaboration, and really the best way to think about this is me gathering data from external sources, contract manufacturer, suppliers, so I can have a full picture of what my supply chain looks like. So this is really key to gathering insights. So if I want to collaborate with a supplier where they're going to tell me what their capacities are to make sure I don't send them more PO quantities than they can actually satisfy. Or if I want to know when a vendor ships me the product and have a communication where they can commit to that, I know, hey, this product's going to be coming on time or it's going to be late. And it can also simulate what some of the effects are inside of the supply chain run. So this, once again, is me really rounding out the supply chain process to be gathering data outside of my internal systems. So when I think of this from a high level, these are really the three kind of broad areas that will be touched from a supply chain planning perspective. For me, if I'm a JDE Edwards customer, what it comes down to is a few key components. The increased speed to decision is massive, right? I can get to a decision, simulate a decision, know the impacts in a short period of time. It's also heavily decreasing the amount of manual manipulation that I have to do inside of the system or outside of the system. So I've gone through high level holistically of what the tool is, what some of the features are. I'm now going to go ahead and pass it over to Dave and allow him to actually show you how some of them work.
Thank you, Brian. Can everybody see? Can you see my screen okay, Brian? Okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Moon. I am a principal with Terillium, and as they indicated earlier, I have 20 years of industry experience, both with JDE Edwards and with Oracle planning solutions. So I've been on both sides of the house for a long time, integrated the products a number of times over my career. This is what you're looking at now is the landing page from the demand management side, right? And hopefully you guys will notice a couple things. One is that Oracle Cloud Solution is a little more visual than what JD Edwards provides, but it also provides some high-level data that's presented, is designed to present to the planners to highlight things about the plan, right? And hopefully, again, as you guys being long-term JD Edwards folks, you'll recognize some of the nomenclature with our bikes, and we'll see some 220 red bikes in our presentation. So hopefully you're familiar with that data. But it's designed to really give the demand planners visibility into the plan without having to go into the grids like JD Edwards and really look at a very detailed view of each of the plan. And you kind of know, here are my top items that I have to deal with. So let me drill into my 220 and see what my 220 is doing. This is designed to help bring those things forward. And so each one of these boxes up at the top here are really KPIs, right? And so underneath each one of these KPIs, so this is MAPE as an example. If I select MAPE, which is mean absolute percent error, so it's the measurement of the forecast error rate, I can see some data changing down below. What this data represents is an aggregate state across the plan for my bike data. And what it allows me to do in this view is go ahead and drill in. If I double click, I drill into the next level of data, right? And so in this case, I'm looking at all of my master planning families coming out of JD Edwards into one view, right? And so I have a couple things that this is telling me. One, the size of the box is actually telling me the value of what's underneath this, right? So master planning family in our demo world with bike 200 bike, that has the largest value associated with it. So I want to be sort of cued in on what the MAPE is for that. I also have some darker red, right? And so this means that these have a little bit higher MAPE than what the other ones do. So this might be of interest to me. So Oracle is giving us the ability to see how our plan is performing very quickly, very at an aggregate state with the ability to look at other levels of data. So let's say that I don't know what's going on here. I want to drill in and do a little bit. I want to see this data a little bit differently, right? And so I might drill into this data and say, oh, geez, here's the item level now, right? So the item level is going to tell me, here's my 210 bike, here's my 220 bike, here's my 221, which happens to be a new product introduction representation, and then some of these other bikes over here. So this might be an indicator or a way for me to look at exactly what's happening with these items, right? And let's say that I want to drill in and I want to go into a little bit further analysis of this 220 just to see what's going on. What this allows me to do is right from that screen, drill in and get down to a level of data that people begin to recognize as planners and JD Edwards planners, right? So this might be sort of a grid representation that you'd see in JD Edwards, but one of the things that you're seeing here is that it's at the master planning family level, right? And all of this is configurable to the end user. As a user, as a demand planner, I can come in and I can create the columns of data that I want to see here, which Oracle calls measures. I can see, in this case, for this particular item and time period, that this is the shipment history. Do I have any sales orders logs against it? I also can see additional forecasts. So in the case of JDE Edwards, you have a customer forecast, and then you have kind of your primary forecast, and you might have the best fit, right? And that's kind of what you see. Well, in Oracle Cloud, you have the ability to have multiple forecast streams lined up to side by side. In this case, this is the sales forecast versus the shipments forecast, right? So the shipment is actually the statistical forecast that's being generated by the engine here that represents my feed of shipments into that for the period of history for that item, and then it generates a statistical forecast for that. The other nice thing that I have here is that I have the ability to adjust my forecast right here, right? And so let's say I don't like that number of 1970, I want to make it 2000. If I just click into this box, it allows me to override that forecast, right? And what this allows me to do is then see what the override may be. It also allows me to do a, let me do it this way. It also allows me to create a note. If I make a change, since you can see I've made a change of 55 previously to this, I can come in and I can actually create a note that's associated with this, right? This is a change to the forecast, right? And I can save that note. And that way I have representation of this change for however long I need it, right? The other thing that is nice about the view here, right? So I'm looking at this in aggregate state. Rather than having to go off and do a different view, I can go ahead and select under here and see what the details of this, right? So this happens to be just a particular item because of the way we selected into it, but I could have multiple items underneath it. So it's a nice way to view and look at the data that's associated with that. So I'm gonna leave this view. And that's the other thing, just when you see this, I've made a change to the system, I've modified something, and this is asking me, do you want to save those changes or continue? So it's just a warning indicating that, hey, something's changed there. Do you really want to move off of that, right? So it's a good check to that. The next thing I'm going to show is new product introductions, right? So one of the things that can be somewhat challenging about new product introductions is how do I manage that, right? How do I know what's new product coming in versus all the other items that I have? I might be a demand planner and maybe there's the engineering team is responsible for entering the new items and I don't have notion to what's in here. This gives me the ability, or Cloud gives me the ability to identify those items, and now I have traceability of those items within this grid, right? So any item, and this happens to be just this one item, 220 MPI, it gives me ability to look at the forecast, see how it's being generated and when it may come due, right? When we may anticipate starting to look at that information. So again, just the design is to help us find data quickly, see things in an aggregate and a detailed way as easily as possible. The other thing that's important to know, right? These things are all configurable. There's two layers of configuration. One is the security. So if I don't have access to certain views, then I won't have access to be able to see them. But also all of these things are customizable, right? So if I came in and I created a secondary view of this data, of this plan that I have open, right? And this happens to be a sort of a way in which I might look at evaluating my sales history. And over to the left is a detailed look at my history, right? That shows what's my sales history 1 year ago, right? So what do most planners and most forecasting teams do is they look here and they say, hey, what did I do last year? Well, this lines this data right up with the shipments history, which is the current year, as well as my adjusted history. So have there been any overrides? The reason why you may do this, and again, this is very different than JDE Edwards, is that if I have some anomalies in here, right? And so this, again, this is simply demo data. So there's all kinds of strange things that happens as we test and do things on the JDE Edwards side that we brought in. And so some of these are anomalies. So this 198, maybe that was a one-time event that I wanted to fix, right? Or I wanted to say, hey, that customer, we had some obsolete, he bought a big chunk of it, but I don't want to count that into my statistical modeling in the future. So I want to adjust that out. Or this 14, maybe there was a shutdown period that happened that's not going to reoccur. So I want to give an example of how that kind of looks. The other thing that this does, right, is as I select into here, it's giving me a graph that represents the specific item that I'm looking at. And this goes on for many items below here. I'm just highlighting this one item, but it gives me the ability to see this. This is also a place, right? So if I wanted to easily change my forecast here, right, and say, hey, I'm sorry, my history here, I don't like the way my history looks, I can come here and I can change all of the history here for these periods that I want to. And I have the ability to do a couple things. I can take and say, I want to take my shipment history and I want to increase it, right, by 20%. And if I go ahead and say okay to that, the system then records that change, right, and says, hey, I was 50, I've increased it 20%, so I'm now at 70. And what you'll notice over here is that now my final shipments history, so it's always shipment history, sort of the original data, so I always have reference to it, what I've overridden, and then the final. And what's important about the final is that that is the data that's going to be going into the statistical forecast to be able to generate the stat forecast. So if I have errors or I have things that that I don't like the way the forecast is manipulated, I can easily influence the way that the engine is running and dealing with that data, right? So the other thing that this allows me to do is that once I've made that change, I can actually come down here and do a simulate demand. And what that will allow me to do is actually execute for this change a new forecast, right? And so it lists across for me all of the models that are associated with it. Oracle's forecasting solution is much different and way more complex mathematical models than what JDE Edwards has out of the box. These do a much better job of looking at trending, looking at seasonality. As you can kind of tell by the forecast that's generated here, this is not typically what you'd see out of a JDE Edwards forecast. JDE Edwards tend to be a little more linear, but in this case, this is giving me a lot of different influences to that. And so it allows me to see what's going on there. It allows me to see what they call a decomposition group, which is actually influences on things like trend, right? So how fast am I trending up? How fast am I trending down? What are the holidays that are associated in this time period? All of those have influences within the engine. And then I can come here and I can designate, hey, I want to generate a new forecast, but I want to stick it in another column and bring that into the table so that I can see the results of all of my changes. So that kind of speaks to the simulation capability that Brian was referencing to, rather than having to resubmit a full run like you might in JDE Edwards, this allows you to do a very simplified, hey, I need to do a quick review of these changes. Is this what's, is this going to make sense to us, right? So I'm going to go ahead and close that. So I think that's about all I wanted to show about the demand planning. So I'm going to move on to the supply planning and do a high-level review of the supply planning. So I'm going to jump over to supply planning. Hopefully these look a little bit familiar from what Brian was kind of showing you, and that there's multiple modules, and we'll come back to that momentarily. So let me jump into the supply planning. Supply planning is going to look somewhat similar to what our demand management was, but you can see the data is a little different here, right? And so this is more specific to actual supply side of the house rather than demand. And what this is showing is this is giving me an indication of where my inventory is sitting, right? So I have an inventory turns metric, which hopefully you guys recognize is pretty horrible since I'm in a demo environment, but in this case, it's showing me where my inventory positions are. So it's kind of a cool way to see based on size and color indicates what the value and the quantity is. So kind of a good way for me to see as a supply planner, where am I holding most of my inventory? The other side of this is a graph that represents the safety stock, another kind of critical piece that supply planning takes a look at and sees where is my safety stock, right? It's always this balance of I need to satisfy demand, but unfortunately I also have to carry inventory. I want to have pressures to reduce inventory. So this gives me a picture, and as I hover over, it tells me here's my safety stock value, here's the value of that inventory, $13,000, and so this is a relatively large size, so it might be something that I'd want to drill into. So very good metric. The other thing is the demand at risk that Brian kind of mentioned before. So this is, most clients find this to be very helpful in looking at this. And what this will show us, sorry, I have to back out a little bit. What this will show us is, in this particular case, you can see we're at a master planning family and items below that, right? So this is kind of how we're segregated. But inside this is telling me that because I'm green, these have demands at risk. So these are sales orders out of all of these items. These are the sales orders that need to have a particular attention paid to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill into this, and I'm going to drill into an area called demand fulfillment, right? And so navigation builds upon navigation, high level on one side into details on the other. So I don't have to know my items like you might in JDE Edwards to know specifically to go to those items. This is telling me these are the items to pay attention to. And what this gives me is sort of some graphical information, some data, and then it comes down here and tells me down to the specific sales order, right? Here's multiple sales orders that are at risk of not being able to be supplied. And you can see it even tells me that based on my current projections, I'm 14 days late, right? And then so if I come down even further and I look at, all right, what are the things that are causing that to be late, I can come down here and I can actually see, oh, I have a purchase order out here for 200 that needs to be expedited 9 days. As Brian indicated, some of the long lead time items, these are planned orders that need to be executed, and we need to, contact the supplier and say we need to bring those in earlier, or we're not going to be able to fulfill this demand. So a really nice, convenient way to see, here's my areas that have risk, and here's some of the details on how I might have to address that. And so from even here, I can drill into more details. I can come in here and I can go to what the area called supplies and demand, right? And what supplies and demand does is that allows us to really get down to the nuts and bolts of what I want to do. And so in this case, I just selected one. I could have multiples here, but this is telling me this planned order needs to be executed, and I can come in here and I can change the date. I can say, okay, I've talked to the supplier, I want to change the date. I can change the quantity and say he can't give me all of that, or I'm going to ask for twice what I asked for, and he's able to supply it, right? And we're going to change, maybe we're going to change the shipping method. And so there's lots of things that we can do here. And then once I've satisfied that, I'll come down here and I'll say I'm going to mark that for release. And so what this does is this is sort of that process messages in JDE Edwards. This is telling me, hey, I'm ready as a planner. I'm good to create this as a purchase order. So next time we run the job to release all of these orders that I've just marked as release, this will actually generate the purchase order, right? So from a integration standpoint, what happens is in the cloud side, we release this, we pick that release up, and we send it over to JDE Edwards to create that purchase order, right? So that's kind of how the supply and demands are managed at a very high level. Lots of information that's available. The next piece that I'm going to show is the resource, right? So both sides of the house are represented here, both the what am I short with materials and how's my resource line up, right? And so if I come down here, I'm seeing graphs about, if I look at this blue, this is what's required, right? And this is what my availability is, so that I can see right away that I have issues with several of these work orders or these resources. So maybe some of these are important, maybe some of them are not, but I need to know a little bit more about what data am I going to look at, or what is making this up. So I'm going to drill into an area called resource requirements. And what resource requirements is going to do for that particular resource, so we're looking at 200, 120 labor, for that particular resources, this is all of the orders that is drawing upon those, whether they be planned or firm work orders. These are the resources that are required in order to make this happen, right? So it's a nice detail of why am I in trouble? How am I going to look at this? And then Oracle Cloud, again, to make things sort of easy or helpful to people. The other thing is that there's other visualizations that can happen here, right? So I can come in here and I can open a Gantt chart. And when the Gantt chart opens, what it'll show me is sort of a visualization of across time, right? How do those orders stack up? So it gives me just a nice visualization of how these things are stacking up, where this timeline is coming from, the weeks that I have difficulty with, right? So just again, another nice little added capability that contrasts to JDE Edwards having sort of a fixed view of that information in just the grids. So let's go back and let's look at this one more time in a little bit different view. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to open this as a resource plan. And this is going to tell you very quickly how my resources, what time periods my resources are overloaded, right? These are the areas that I have demand that exceeds my available resources, and so I need to do something with this, right? Now, this particular plan was run without this being a bottleneck, so we're allowing this sort of circumstance to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to a different plan. As we talked about, cloud planning allows you to have multiple plans, right? So you can have simulations, you can have long-term plans, you can have plans that represent a particular planner or a particular organization. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and open up another plan to look at the same data. So the same plan was run. The only difference is that we turned that resource into a bottleneck resource, and we ran that plan over the bottleneck resource. And if you see, right, we now have, oh, our resource availability is above our requirement. Why is that? So let's look at what the plan did that for me automatically, right? So I come here to the resource plan because it was bottlenecked, because we wanted to run our plan in order to maximize that. This is the result of that, right? So previously, where we had a bunch of red indicating overcapacity, the plan here was run with this as a bottleneck and level loaded that the best it could, and then to constrain our plan to the availability of that and maximize the output of that resource, right? So just quickly, I want to show a couple of the other areas just to give you a representation of what those look like, right? So sales and operations planning, similar in its look and view, but notice that there's things that are brought together here, right? So it's looking at the forecast data, it's looking at the inventory data, all unified together. It's looking at margin, it's looking at profit, it's looking at the things, the three legs of the stool, right? The forecast, the demand planning, supply planning, and finance, bringing those all together into one area so that you can see those across the board. What sort of differentiates Oracle Cloud in its SNLP is that you can define very definitive cycles, right? So if anybody's familiar with the process, there's typically a demand review, supply review, financial review, and then an executive review. Well, within cloud, we can define sort of at a project level type that says, here are the tasks that we need to do for each one of those things, and you can specify those, and you can have messages go out and say, hey, you're late to delivering the things we need for our SLP planning process, right? So again, very sort of good and advanced way to do SNLP. The other piece of this is replenishment planning. So maybe you have a warehouse or a branch plant within JDE Edwards that really doesn't need a full supply planning area. It only needs to work sort of at a minimum maximum level capability, right? Oracle provides that same thing, right? We can do it's more sophisticated than just a regular min-max. It's looking at forecast data. It's leveraging some of the same capabilities as the supply planning piece, but really it's only doing minimum and maximum inventory levels. So it's a little less intensive than the supply planning piece. The last piece that I want to talk about is backlog management. And again, we see a tremendous capability here for JDE Edwards clients to use. And what backlog management allows me to do is it allows me to really get to that next level of understanding my demand picture from a sales order perspective and how that may be influential. If you look to the sort of the middle and left of the screen, you see improved, unchanged, and delayed columns. Those are all orders that are coming out of backlog management that has issues with them. And what the system allows you to do is to drill into that and say, hey, I need to change the way this is architected or way the plan is satisfying these orders by request date or by a certain date, right? Some customers may have some flexibility about when those are delivery. And what this does is allows you to give you a workbench where you can allocate your supply specifically to orders, right? Maybe you have a very important customer that you have to satisfy. This toolkit allows you to allocate your available inventory to those specific customers, to those orders, and then the plan recognizes that inventory, recognizes that allocation to help optimize that, and you get feedback about all of that. So I think that's all I wanted to cover. So Brian, do you want to pick it up with questions?
Guys, at this point where we're at is, we've gone through the high level understanding of the supply chain planning tool, what it can do, how it benefits JDE Edwards customers. From here, we'll take some questions. I know some have come in. but also wanted to make sure everyone is aware that this is something that we have built out. So Matt talked about earlier a tool that we have built out called Amplify, which allows us to really connect JDE and the cloud planning tool. It's something that is based on our knowledge in JD Edwards and based on our knowledge in cloud. So we have that built. Also, we do free to you guys SCM webinars. So if you feel like this is a tool that'd be a great fit for you, we can come on site or get on a call, talk through your current issues, and determine how this could be a possible good fit for you guys. So I know we got 2 minutes. A couple of questions have come in, so I'll go ahead and run through these. So hey, Jen, can Oracle Cloud be used with JDE on-premise? So absolutely, this is meant to be used with an on-premise JDE Edwards solution. So you don't need to be utilizing JDE in an OCI environment. You can utilize it with your current on-premise solution. Hey, Brian, hopefully New York's well. Does this work with configured items? Yes, you can do this in a configured order type of environment, which is very powerful. How real time is the integration between JDE and cloud? And it's ultimately dependent on each organization. Some people do it daily, some people do it every hour. It just depends. A lot of times master data isn't as continuously moving, whereas transactional data is. So let's get going here. Let me just read through this. Yeah, so it talks about, does it work? The last screen you presented, does it work without orders? In other words, can we allocate some stock to a specific customer, even if an order has not been placed? Yeah, absolutely. That's usually based on more kind of a forecasting perspective, but you can allocate those to specific customers. JDE E1 version capability. Hey, Micah. So it's really compatible with any E1. So it's really just the integration we would need to work through based on that. Anyone else before? I know we're right at the top of the hour, but anyone else, any questions? Okay. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate your time today. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions at brose@terillium.com, and hopefully we'll be hearing from you guys soon. Take care. Have a good rest of your week.